man just carry his billion to go and pay for it. Something was supposed to be the commonwealth of all Nigerians.
On the morning of 19th of January 2001, 4 companies left an auction room in Abuja, holding the exact same price. A license to build a mobile phone network in Nigeria. Each license cost $285 million. Each operator received the same Septron, followed the same rules, and had just 90 days to launch its network. One of those 4 companies was MTN, a newcomer backed by South African money. Another was M-Tel, the mobile arm of Nigeria's own state Telecom. The home team, the Nigeria every patriot expected to win. Today, MTN Nigeria carries more than 90 million subscribers and pulled in over 2 trillion naira in single half year. M-Tel no longer serve any customers. The company that owned it was eventually broken up and sold, including its nationwide assets, for just $252 million, less than $285 million paid for a single mobile license 2 decades earlier. One built an empire, the other disappeared. But here is what is surprising. This wasn't a story of a foreign company coming in and taking over Nigeria's telecom industry. Nobody stole the market. No outside rival came in and crushed the national champion. What happened was far more interesting and far more complicated. It happened through a series of decisions, each approved in Abuja, each presented at the time as necessary reform. This is the story of how Nigeria lost its national telecom giant and in the process helped create the market dominance of the MTN. If you're yet to subscribe to my channel, kindly like and subscribe. Now back to the video. For most of the 20th century, telephone in Nigeria were controlled by one company, Nitel, the Nigeria Telecommunication Limited. It was state-owned monopoly, formed in 1985 by merging the old Post and Telecommunications Department with the agency that handled Nigeria's international calls. If you wanted a phone line in Nigeria, Nitel was the only door, and it controlled who walked through it. That door barely opened. From independence in 1960 all the way to the year 2000, 4 decades, Nigeria managed to install around 400,000 working telephone lines. That works out to roughly 10,000 new lines a year for a country heading past 100 million people. The man who would later run Nigeria's telecom regulator, Ernest Ndukwe, recalled that by 1999, there were over 10 million people on Nitel's waiting list. The wait for a connection could stretch to 2 years. Some people waited far longer. A landline wasn't a utility, it was a status symbol, a heavy plastic box that sat in homes of wealthy people. To make an international call, ordinary Nigerians traveled to Nitel call center and sometimes slept in the building overnight just to hear a relative's voice. So the demand was enormous. A nation of more than 100 million people, almost entirely cut off from one another by distance and silence. The pressure to fix it had been building for years. By the end of the 1990s, a new civilian government decided the monopoly had to end. In 1999, Nigeria returned to civilian rule under President Olusegun Obasanjo, and his administration moved fast on telecoms. Within months, it published a new national policy with a simple promise: open the market, invite private money, and let companies build what the state never could. The plan ran through a body called the Nigerian Communications Commission, the NCC, the independent regulator created to police the industry and run the sales. And the centerpiece was an auction for a new generation of mobile licenses. This is the moment Nigeria did something genuinely impressive. Government contracting in the country had a reputation for backroom deals, so the NCC, led by Ernest Ndukwe, ran the license sales as a live ascending auction, bids climbing in the open in real time with international observers watching. On the 19th of January 2001, 5 serious bidders gathered in Abuja: MTN backed by South Africa, Econet Wireless led by the Zimbabwean entrepreneur Steve Masiyiwa, the company you now know as El-Tel, a venture tied to Egypt's Orascom, another tied to the Sudanese British billionaire Mo Ibrahim, and Communications Investment Limited fronted by the Nigerian businessman Mike Adenuga. The bidding ran for 3 days. When it stopped, the price for a single license had reached $285 million, a figure Masiyiwa later called most expensive mobile license issued anywhere in Africa at that time. The winner handed Nigeria's treasury hundreds of millions of dollars, and the process drew praises from the international press as clean and credible. And this is the detail that makes the whole story so surprising. When Nigeria auctioned off the licenses to build its new mobile network, it didn't leave its own companies behind. A fourth license at the same 285 million price with the same Spectrum and the same rules was reserved for M-Tel, the home arm of Nitel. On paper, it was an ideal starting position. The foreign operators and Nigeria's national telecom company were standing on the same starting line. But while the private operators were raising capitals, building towers, and preparing for launch, M-Tel was trapped inside a state-owned company, struggling with bureaucracies, debts, and years of underinvestment. Nigeria had given its own telecom company a seat at the table. What it didn't give it was the support needed to compete. A mobile license is not a network. It's permission to spend. To turn that permission into ringing phones, an operator has to pour money into masts, switches, generators, and fiber year after year before most of the revenue arrives. In those early years, the private operator were each spending well over $200 million a year just to keep building. MTN quickly got to work. In its first few years, the company said it invested more than $1 billion in building its network, laying thousands of kilometers of cable and expanding services to cities across Nigeria. Econet did the same. The network grew at a speed nobody in Nigeria had ever seen. M-Tel held the exact same license. What it did not have was the money. After the state company paid its fee, the government that owned it never came close to matching what the private player were spending. M-Tel did manage to switch on a basic network in 2001 and 2002, but it was tough from the start. Its equipment was patchy, its billing failed, and crucially, it struggled to strike the interconnection deal that would let its customers call the subscribers of MTN and Econet, leaving its users stranded on an island. As the mobile market raced past 20 million subscribers, M-Tel limped along in a distant third place with around 500,000. The state had licensed a champion and then refused to pay for it to compete. And just as M-Tel was falling behind, Abuja made a choice that turned a struggling company into a collapsing one. By the early 2000s, it was becoming clear that Nitel and M-Tel had a problem. The mobile revolution was happening fast. Private operators were expanding across the country, but Nigeria's state-owned telecom company was struggling to keep up. So the government came up with a plan. Before selling the company, it wanted to bring in professional managers to turn things around first. The job fell to the Bureau of Public Enterprise, or BPE, the agency responsible for privatizing state-owned companies. At the time, the agency was headed by El-Rufai. What happened next would become one of the most controversial chapters in the history of Nigeria's telecom industry. The brief seemed straightforward. The government wanted an experienced international telecom operator, a company with a proven track record of running large phone networks. Then came the surprise. On April 28, 2003, the contract was awarded to a little-known Dutch firm called Pentascope. Pentascope wasn't a major telecom operator. It was a relatively young consultancy with no history of running a national telecommunications network. The outcome wasn't disappointing, it was catastrophic. When Pentascope arrived, Nitel was still profitable, reporting roughly 15 billion in profits. About a year later, it was posting losses of more than 19 billion. Revenue had been cut in half. Active telephone lines fell from more than 550,000 to under 300,000. While Pentascope earned millions of dollars in management fee, Nitel was losing customers, burning cash, and sinking deeper into debt. By the time the contract was terminated, the company was in worse condition than when Pentascope took over. One former M-Tel managing director later described the episode as a disaster for telecom sector, pointing to employees who spent years waiting for pension that never arrived. And this wasn't the end. Over the next decades, variations of the same mistake would be repeated again and again. Once the management experience failed, the government decided the answer was to sell Nitel outright. Over the next several years, it tried again and again, and a strange pattern set in. A buyer would be announced with a great fanfare, then the deal would quietly collapse. The first attempt actually came back in 2001 when a group called Investors International London Limited won the right to buy the controlling stake for over $1.3 billion. The group paid its 10% deposit and then failed to raise the rest. The deal died. In 2006, the government tried again, selling a controlling stake to Transcorp, the transnational corporation, a large Nigerian conglomerate, for around $750 million. This time, the buyer was Nigerian and the hopes were high, but the company's foreign technical partner, the former British Telecom, walked away amid disputes over funding and governance. Without the expertise to run the network and without the cash to rebuild it, Transcorp management drifted. On the 1st of June 2009, the federal government cancelled the Transcorp sale, declaring the company had failed to meet the goals of the privatization. Nitel was handed back to the states, weaker than ever. The situation kept changing. A group led by China Unicom and the New Generation Group was selected as a buyer with a bid worth billions of dollars, but later withdrew from the deal. Another bidder, Homen International, was selected in 2011 and failed to pay the required deposits. Each collapse cost months and years. And while the government circled through buyers after buyer, the network it was trying to sell rotted in place. This was the third pattern that killed M-Tel and his parents. Every announcement bought time nobody used the time to build. By the time a deal finally held, there was almost nothing left to save. In December 2014, after years of false starts and National Council of Privatization, the National Council of Privatization approved the final sales. Nitel and M-Tel, the licenses, the mast, the building, even the valuable undersea cables that connected Nigeria to Europe went to a group called the Telecom Consortium.
By this approval, the transaction, is come to a closure. And the council has mandated the Group for Public Enterprise to hand over these two companies.
The price for all of it was $250 million. Read that against the start of the story. A single mobile license in 2001 had cost $285 million. In 2015, the entire national telecom, the company that had been the only phone provider in Africa's most populous country, changed hands for less than the price of that one license. Critics said even that figure sat far below what the assets were truly worth. Natcom relaunched the business under a lowercase name, M-Tel, and tried to bring it back. It never recovered. The brand that had once had Nigerians sleep in queues to make a phone call faded out almost without notice. Now look at the company that started beside it. By early 2026, MTN Nigeria carried roughly 94 million subscribers, more than half of every active mobile line in the country. In the first half of 2025 alone, it booked over 2 trillion naira in revenue, on course for its biggest year ever. El-Tel, the old Econet, sits second with around 60 million. Globalcom, built by that same Nigerian man, Mike Adenuga, who had been knocked out of the 2001 auction, came back to claim third. The telecom sector those companies built now contributes around 9% of Nigeria's entire economy. The market was never handed to MTN in an envelope. What Nigeria handed over was the absence of a competitor. The country built a fair race and a clean auction, a real achievement. It put its own champion in an equal lane with an equal fee. And then through its own decision, the budget is never released. The contractor it never should have hired. The buyer it spent a decade chasing. It took that champion off the track entirely. 13,850 Nitel workers were let go as the privatization ground on. Many still owed pension years after. If you like content like this, kindly subscribe to my channel. Thank you. See you in the next video.